I want to talk about Gonzalo Lira. He's an American Chilean citizen who has been in Ukraine throughout the length of this Russian special military operation, which began February 2022. Last year, he was detained by the SBU for making videos critical of the Ukrainian government and its Western backers. He was under a form of house arrest, I guess you could call it. He was able to travel throughout Kharkov, I guess. And then this year, he was very publicly arrested. SBU agents in battle gear carrying war weapons dragged him out of his apartment. They made a very public spectacle out of all of it, and then he disappeared. And presumably, and as it turns out, he was in jail that entire time, awaiting trial. And eventually, they let him out on bail. And just the other day, he attempted to make it across the border into Hungary to seek asylum. And he posted a very lengthy Twitter thread, this is August 1st, regarding what he was attempting to do. The charges against him, he provided the documents, photographs of the documents regarding the charges against him, and he described the conditions in prison, which included torture and extortion, which should surprise nobody. This is what Ukraine is notorious for, as one of the most corrupt countries on earth. Since then, he has not been heard from publicly. It's to be assumed that he did not make it across the border and that he is still at the mercy of Ukraine's security services. The U.S. State Department is well aware of his first arrest, and now, thank you to the gray zone, they are well aware of his claims that he was tortured in prison, that he is seeking to flee the country to escape these politically motivated charges.
Cosgrove with the Gray Zone. So back in May, I asked you about Gonzalo Lira. He was the U.S. citizen arrested in Ukraine for posting dissident content online, and you told me the State Department was aware of his arrest in May. And we learned last night through a series of tweets by him that he had been tortured in the Ukrainian prison, and he was now on a motorcycle with a broken rib trying to flee to the Hungarian border. And so I'm wondering, if this is true, given the State Department knew of his arrest and his detention, how has this been allowed to occur? We have a U.S. citizen being detained and perhaps tortured in the prison of one of our strongest allies.
Well, you lost me with the perhaps and the if this is true. I think I'd want to verify those reports before I commented on it. Alex, go ahead.
Alex, go ahead. Is the State Department investigating?
I just want to verify anything before I comment. Go ahead, Alex. Yeah.
Now, we all know that if it was Russia accused of doing this, the U.S. would take any claim made by some dissident at face value, and they would leap immediately into action. In reality, the U.S. State Department has known about Gonzalo's unlawful arrest back in May. They should have acted immediately to have him released. This whole issue of whether or not he was actually tortured shouldn't even be a question that needs to be asked. I want to talk about the charges now. Again, he provided the documents, photographs of the documents, and if you zoom in, you can see quite clearly that this has nothing to do with any sort of actual crime. It's about the manufacture and distribution of materials containing justification recognition as legitimate denial of the armed aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, which began in 2014, as well as justification recognition as legitimate of the temporary occupation of part of the territory of Ukraine. In other words, for having a political opinion. That is why they arrested him and why he faces a lengthy jail sentence. And if you look at some of the other documents that cover the supposed evidence of his crimes, you can see that they're all links to his YouTube videos. And I want to refresh everybody's memory. The Kharkov Oblast Prosecutor's Office, that's what it says right there, they put a video up about 2 months ago, right after they arrested him, and they provided clips of the supposed crimes that he committed. Let's listen in again.
Vladimir Putin, he is, for all intents and purposes, what you would call an ethnic nationalist. But he's not an imperialist, the Kiev regime. I'm telling you right now. These people are neo-fascist, neo-Nazis. The West is the one puppeteering Zelensky, right? The Kiev regime also constantly shelling the regions of the Donbass. 16,000 people died after 2015 up until the start of this conflict. 1,000 children or 800 children were killed.
He's talking about the presence of Nazis in Ukraine, which is a fact. He also talked about the Ukrainian government shelling the people of the Donbass region since 2014, also a fact. As a matter of fact, I want to show you how even the U.S. government, Ukraine's chief sponsor in all of this, has admitted that there are indeed Nazis in Ukraine, that it's such a problem they had to custom tailor their legislation because of it. This is House.gov, Congressman Ro Khanna. This was in 2018. Congress bans arms to Ukraine militia linked to neo-Nazis. They mention the Azov Battalion, and they use the term neo-Nazism. It's unacceptable, and they have to make sure that none of the money that they're sending to Ukraine, any of the weapons or training that they're sending to Ukraine, make it into the hands of the Azov battalion. And the reason that it could potentially fall into their hands is because these Nazis were incorporated in their own military units within the Ukrainian armed forces officially. In regards to shelling the Donbas region, we have this from Human Rights Watch. Human Rights Watch is another Western-based, Western-centric, so-called human rights group that has been a champion for Ukraine's cause throughout the duration of the special military operation. Yet this from 2014 says Ukraine widespread use of cluster munitions, government, the Ukrainian government, responsible for cluster attacks on that. So that's exactly what Gonzalo Lira said, and that is the reason Ukraine itself said they arrested him for. Where is Human Rights Watch right now? Why aren't they speaking up for Gonzalo Lira? He's talking about information they themselves made public as far back as 2014. The Ukrainian government is openly admitting that this is the reason they're arresting Gonzalo Lira. Why isn't Human Rights Watch at the forefront calling for his release? Again, because it is an organization that hides behind human rights advocacy, uses human rights advocacy as a means of advancing U.S. foreign policy objectives. It does not actually stand up for human rights. So this is unacceptable. The U.S. State Department was well aware of his situation, and they've very clearly, deliberately decided not to do anything about it if they weren't directly involved in it. And one last thing I want to talk about are people accusing Gonzalo Lira of being some sort of SBU asset. That they only would have let him out if they had some sort of plan for him to go out and discredit the alternative media or to collect information from the alternative media, that they've killed people for doing far less than what Gonzalo Lira was accused of, and they would more than happily kill him unless he was an SBU asset. Tracking down this claim to its original source, you will find that there is no evidence at all to substantiate it. It's based entirely on speculation, driven by very flawed logic. The SBU arrests people in Ukraine every single day for exactly what Gonzalo Lira did. And they're not killing them all. They parade them in front of the media, and then they throw them to the bureaucracy, which is extremely inefficient, corrupt, and incompetent. The idea that Gonzalo Lira would be allowed to get out on bail eventually before his court date is actually very believable. He's not a violent criminal. He is no actual threat to the Ukrainian government. And as far as the bureaucracy is concerned, he's eligible for bail. There was nobody babysitting this case to make sure that he stayed in prison until he was thrown into the gulag. They got their value out of him by parading him in front of the media. That was the whole purpose of arresting him. And he served no use afterwards. Now people are saying, well, he was out on bail, and now he made this video right before crossing the border. Why would he do that? Because Gonzalo Lira is a human being. He was scared. He felt he didn't have any sort of chance of getting this information out to the world if he were to be stopped at the border. And apparently that is what happened. He was stopped at the border, and he's still stuck in Ukraine. That is the reason he recorded that before getting out of Ukraine. Obviously, if you don't actually get out of Ukraine, you don't have the ability to tell people your story on the other side of the border if you're going back to prison in Kharkov. Common sense. This idea that he's some sort of SBU asset, collecting information from the alternative media. Well, after the first time he disappeared last year, when he reappeared, he told everyone that he was detained by the SBU. So anyone in the alternative media worth collecting information from would have assumed, at a minimum, that any of the electronic devices Gonzalo Lira had would be accessible to the SBU, that anything that they said on camera or off camera to Gonzalo Lira would also be accessed by the SBU. And they would have operated under that assumption. That's how they would have interacted with Gonzalo Lira. I know that that's what I did. And what has Gonzalo Lira been doing ever since his last detainment by the SBU, leading up to this whole episode, arrest, disappearance, and brief reappearance? What has he been doing all of this time that has been serving the interests of the SBU? He's been organizing roundtable discussions, bringing people from across the public and political spectrum to draw attention to the crimes of the government of Ukraine and their Western sponsors. He's helped merge audiences together. He's created collaborations between different people who wouldn't have met otherwise, who are now off collaborating elsewhere. And the vector sum has been very unfavorable to the Ukrainian government and their Western sponsors. So if this is some master plan by the SBU, it's a horrible plan, and Gonzalo Lira is a terrible SBU asset. The people making this claim are distracting and obstructing public support from building up around his case. And that's what we need to be doing right now, is building public support up around Gonzalo Lira's case. Whatever else you may think about him regarding his other political views, he was specifically arrested in Ukraine for opposing Nazis and opposing the shelling of civilian areas in the Donbas region. That is something I think everybody could get behind. Whether you have suspicions of his cooperation with the SBU or not, the right thing to do is to get behind him, support him publicly anyway. And if we're all being duped, so be it. We're doing the right thing by speaking up about this. We need to continue building public support to put pressure on the U.S. government, the U.S. State Department, who's supposed to be helping Gonzalo Lira, not dismissing his claims, glossing over him and changing the subject. We have to put pressure on these so-called human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, who have so far completely ignored this case. We have to put pressure on Ukraine. If they do nothing, and they allow Gonzalo Lira to languish in prison, at the very least, we need to expose them for their hypocrisy, expose the lies that Ukraine is fighting for freedom and democracy and human rights, when in reality they're clearly trampling it. And they're using human rights as a smokescreen to do so behind. Please like and share this video, get this information out to everyone. Check the video description below for the links to Gonzalo Lira's videos and his tweets that he posted during his brief reappearance. And let's continue working to solve this problem